I don't know about you, but I only trust the best. So if you're looking at getting your roof checked out, redone, these are the guys that can help you. Belter Roofing and Construction, they are the best. They'll come out, do a free inspection. You can trust them with your roof. Call them, Belter Roofing and Construction. 405-952-7777. That's Belter Roofing and Construction.
This is the Jake for the State podcast, and this is the call for every red-blooded, God-fearing, liberty-loving patriot to prepare yourself, take your position, stand your ground, and advance the cause of freedom. Let's go.
All right, guys, welcome back to the Jake for the State podcast, and we're interviewing tons of candidates because it's election season. Got the primaries coming up June 18th. So my next candidate I want to sit down and talk with is Jonathan Hewitt, running for House District 101. Welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Hey, Jake, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure, as always.
Yes. Well, you're a busy man, in life in general, and then you add to that a nice little campaign, and it got you burning things at both ends, right? So
that week is
give
burning.
a little update on what you're doing. You're a law enforcement officer, also a new dad, and man, you're running like crazy. So give us an update on what's happening in the life of Jonathan Hewitt.
Still being a dad and being a husband, I think that anybody who's married and has kids know that that's a full-time job, regardless of what you have going on. And I still work nights, so from 10 p.m. till 7 in the morning. And then, like you said, we throw on the campaign on top of that, which is going tremendously well, knocking doors daily. And then I also have some volunteers that are out knocking doors and getting good feedback and just trying to get the message out to the district, and that they do have an ulterior option, and one that will stand true to their values and to their words, and not sell out to certain special interest groups, and which I think is vitally important. And so,
Yes, no doubt.
On the campaign trail,
I want to get to that point of the special interest groups, the lobbyists, the PAC money. I want to get to that in just a second. First, how long have you been in law enforcement?
Coming up on 7 years.
Okay.
I took a little bit of a hiatus, but
okay, down in the Moore area, is that right?
Yeah, I work for the city of Moore.
Okay, wonderful. And you have entered to run against an incumbent, and my argument is anytime I see that, it's usually an indicator that there's something people aren't satisfied with, whether it be you as the candidate or it be the rumor in the district that something needs to change. I don't know, there's some kind of unsettling that usually happens in a district whenever you see someone running against an incumbent. Not always, but a lot of times there is. So is there something you're seeing with the sitting representative Menger that you say, I wish things were being done differently? Is that the reason you ran, or is it for another reason?
Yeah, I think that there's a few reasons, if we're going to talk about that drives me to run. So the first one is my wife and I actually went to our representative for a concern that we had. And we got told, oh, well, that's not really my thing. Go talk to a different representative, which struck me as odd. I'm like, well, if he's done that to me, how many other people has he done that to? And unfortunately, when I started talking to people, that is a common sentiment that happens, that our representative just was unreachable and then did not represent his district. And then secondly, I saw across the legislature a trend away from the values of conservative values and principles that the Republican Party says that we hold. And unfortunately, Representative Menger embodied a vast majority of them. And things like voting for corporate welfare programs, expanding government reaches in numerous sectors that it did not need to be in, that the private sector could handle much more effectively. And then most recently, he had a bill that would put cameras on every single roadway and highway in our state. And with those, it poses a significant threat to just the individual privacy of people. And to have my representative as the person that didn't just vote on it, but said, you know what, this is what our district needs, and this represents our district's values the best, didn't sit well with me. And so, like you said earlier, I have a 1-year-old daughter, and I'm pretty sure when I was on your show the first time, I said that she's the reason I run. Whatever Oklahoma becomes, no matter where that trend ends, she inherits whatever is left. And I couldn't just sit idly by and watch that occur. And then when she's old enough, her to ask me, Dad, what did you do to stop it? And I look at her and say nothing. And so.
Man, such an important point. And you bring up a very interesting piece of legislature we saw working its way through the Capitol this year that was being considered is this issue of surveillance, flock cameras. Of course, on the federal level, the national level, we were seeing the issue of surveillance be central and whether or not we would continue surveilling Americans. But here locally within the state, that is an issue as well. You being in law enforcement is particularly interesting because an argument I hear all the time from law enforcement is it helps us do our job better. It helps us catch criminals. And so how do you balance that? Where do you stand? I think you already told us, but I'll let you just expand on that. Being in law enforcement and seeing the potential benefit of something like flock cameras that would monitor and surveil the general public. Good thing, bad thing? Tell me your stance on that.
Yeah, so I will digress. And I tell people even at the door, like the flock camera system does have the potential and has caught criminals and does do good things. But here's what especially the government has to weigh. And I think you would also agree the government's sole and chief purpose that they're instituted among men is to protect their rights. That is it, right? And that is its sole job. Now, when we're levying and like weighing out the benefits against the risk, is the benefit of a few stolen cars, the potential to find somebody, worth the intrusion into the private life of citizens? You brought up a very good point earlier on the federal level, earlier this year with the FISA being argued and whether or
Right.
not we were going to extend it or not. Dell City released their transparency report earlier this year regarding their use of their limited flock camera systems that they currently have. And what we saw in there was rather alarming. And why I say that is because we found that they are sharing access to those cameras, warrantless access to those cameras with 50 government agencies. Those included the ATF, the FBI, the Postal Service, the Tax Commission, right? The DOJ has already proven itself to not be trustworthy with the individual rights of people. And so to say that we are, as a state, we're going to put these cameras on every single roadway and then have the DOJ and the federal government have access to those cameras is a very, very dangerous, dangerous place to go down. And for the government to say, yes, this is the best use of our tax dollars and this is the best thing that we can do to protect the citizens is, I believe, just disingenuous. I don't think that it represents an accurate means to protect the population. I think that it just gives the government another way into our private life, one that we don't need and that we don't that isn't representative of what Oklahomans want.
I mean, again, it's just a return to the fundamentals and understanding of the role of government, which I so appreciate your position on, is to protect the rights of people. And that's why, as a conservative, we believe in limited government. And it is interesting, as you pointed out in your conversation with your sitting representative, that so many with an R beside their name don't seem to stand by the party platform, the conservative values that they ran on. It's easy to send out mailers saying you're a Republican, you're a conservative, you're a Christian, you're 2A, you're pro-life, all these things. But in the end, it comes down to your voting. Like, how are you actually going to vote and what kind of bills are you going to push forward and support? Even what bills will you oppose? So the voting record tells the story. And when you're running against an incumbent, you have the story right in front of you and people have the story available to them.
Absolutely. So, and I'll say, and it's not me saying it, right? The Oklahoma Constitution, the newspaper has been scoring legislators since the 70s, right? They are very, very well versed on the ebbs and flows of the legislature. And my representative, I believe his first term scored in like the upper 80s, like low 90s in his conservative index, right? Which albeit isn't perfect, but it's still good. I would still be okay with that.
Yeah.
In his 2023 index, he scored a mere 40%. So he's not even batting at 50% average. So not even 50% of the time is he voting in a way that protects the rights of people. And whether it be good stewards of money, whether it be protection of their rights, not expanding government into sectors that they don't need to be expanded into, whether it not be blowing out a $13 billion budget last year, right? Like not even half the time. And I think,
I
and
want to
that's a wide net across the legislature, and why we're in the predicament
exactly.
in the state that we're in is I wish I could say that it's just one single person that needs replaced, but a lot of them no longer represent the values of our state.
I want to ask you some more about a couple issues pertaining to that I feel like you would have insight on being in law enforcement. One of
Of
them
course.
being homelessness, and is a growing concern in the state as it is around the nation. And we here in Oklahoma, especially in the metro in Oklahoma City and Tulsa, are seeing more and more people, and of course reaching down into Moore and Norman, where
Yeah.
you guys live in that area and where you patrol. And so, are you seeing on your end a rise in homelessness in that area? And what are the concerns there, and what do you feel is a good solution to that issue?
Well, I'll break all three of those questions up into three. Yes. Over the last probably year, the amount of homelessness and transients that have made their way through the city of Moore, coming from southern Oklahoma City or northern Norman, has increased. But I think homelessness across the state has increased. From a policy perspective, it comes into a very interesting place, I think, right? Because there with homelessness, there's a lot of like associated other issues that need to be addressed, whether it be drug use and substance abuse, whether it be mental illnesses. Um, and I think from policy wise, it's a double edged sword. I think we have to be very, very careful in the way that we legislate solutions to homelessness, because ultimately they need to receive the health care and mental health care that they need, right? And help with their substance abuse. However, if they're not a danger to themselves or to others, it's not illegal to be homeless. And it's not illegal to want to be homeless. There are a vast majority of homeless people that have been given solutions and then choose not to maintain those solutions, right? And so I think that the biggest thing that we need to do is remove any restrictions that bar the private sector from offering solutions. And here's what I'll say: is there's a really good mental health facility in Norman. It's called Red Rock. It sits right next to Griffin State Hospital. That is a privately funded mental health facility that does vastly better than Griffin State Hospital. I think that's a really good example of that. The state doesn't need to offer the solution. The state needs to remove itself from the solution and allow the private sector to do what it does best. And so, to get to your point, I don't think that we should legislate homelessness as a crime. I think if they want to be homeless, as long as they're not hurting anybody, they're not breaking any other laws, what they choose to do is between them, themselves, their family, and God, and they should be able to live their life to do so, right? Like, there's obviously like the laws of like loitering, obviously littering, public indecency, indecent exposure. Like, obviously, they cannot violate those laws. But I think that from a policy perspective, it is a very dangerous road if we're going to go down and tell people where they cannot live.
You touched on mental illness, which was my next question. And again, a growing concern across the nation, seeing it here in Oklahoma, a heavy emphasis on mental illness. And of course, the connected to the issue of drug use, and which comes first, the chicken or the egg, drug
Yeah,
use or mental illness and drugs. And
for
so
sure.
what are you seeing on the streets as you engage with those who might be considered mentally ill? We know a few years ago there was a big push to, defund the police, and we need to institute social workers to go out and engage with those who are mentally ill, and they'd be more qualified to do that. So, just from your perspective as a police officer, how do you deal with mental illness out on the street, and are you seeing that trend up? And what do you feel is a good solution to it?
Yes, it is trending upwards. I will say that I probably run at least 2 or 3 calls a night regarding those that are mentally ill. In some fashion, right? Whether they're in crisis, like, so they're going through some type of episode like that, they're receiving suicidal ideations or homicidal ideations. I think the state needs to do a few things. One, I think they need to continue their push for law enforcement to receive mental health training, which right now I believe the state requires only 2 hours per year out of the 26 hours required annual training. I think that needs to be more, and I think it needs to be more hands-on and an approach that actually provides officers with actual solutions and not just telling us about mental illness. So I definitely think that there could be an increase in state-sponsored education to law enforcement. I do not think that social workers. I do not think that the field is a good place for social workers. It is a very, very dangerous place to respond to those calls and to put them in that kind of danger. I think may be unnecessary. I'll say the Moore Police Department does something that's really great, actually, and is we have a mental health liaison, and so she is paid by the city, and her whole job is to do two things. She provides law enforcement like us and our families with mental health services. If we find ourselves in a place that the job just became too much for a while, but she also helps us with, I guess you could say, like reoccurring clients. I don't know how you want to tell them, citizens who are experiencing crisis and finding long-term solutions for them, right? Through both the public and private sector. And I think that requiring police departments to have that or something of similar field would be a good balance between the public and private sector and the government's intervention into the lives of people, right? So she's there if she needs it, or if the citizen needs it, or if law enforcement needs it, but it does not construe the government into someone's private life.
Do you think that we should increase the penalty for certain drugs here in Oklahoma? We know that the penalty has been reduced to misdemeanor for so many, and you know I've seen it firsthand in my family, dealing with family members who are caught in the cycle of addiction, and we've reached out to law enforcement. And they say, "Oh, really, our hands are tied. We can go throw her in jail, but she'll walk right back out." And so, you know, do you think that would be part of the solution of drug use out on the street and mental illness, is to increase the penalty, bring it back up to a felony for some drug-related crimes? What are your thoughts on that?
I absolutely agree. I think that, so state question, what was it, 780, I think,
Right.
was a a loaded state question that a lot of people didn't know what they were voting on. So I do understand the concerns of people, and that we would be criminalizing a victim of substance abuse. I will digress and say that again is disingenuous. No one, for the vast majority, held a gun to their head and told them that they had to take meth, heroin, fentanyl for the first time. The vast majority of the time, that's not the case, right? And we come to a part is that there are good programs inside the jail for detox and things like that, right? When they're coming off of drug use. We no longer penalize drug use to the point of where it is going to make an impact in their life. The point of incarceration and the point of going to jail or prison is for reform through incentivizing that you don't want to be in prison. Like, oh, I know if I use fentanyl and I'm caught with it, I will go to prison, right? Well, people don't want to go to prison, so they don't use it, right? I don't want to go to prison, so I'm not going to break into somebody's house, right? We use the justice system as an incentive not to break the law. And when we reduce all of those to misdemeanors, I see it every day. People, like, I'll find some of the drugs and they'll be like, that's just a misdemeanor, right? Like, they know that they're going to get released on their own recognizance. They know that in some cities, like take the city of Moore, for instance, we don't use it very often, but the city of Moore now has its own controlled dangerous substance, like, ordinance. So it could be reduced down to a city level ticket instead of a state charge. And people know that. And they're not being held accountable, and they don't feel like if they use drugs that they will bear any consequences. And so in the, like, them trying to fix, I guess you could say, or help those that are struggling with substance abuse, they ended up incentivizing drug use, which was the exact opposite of what they were hoping for.
Jonathan, you've been out actively in the district, out in House District 101, talking to the people. And I think it's very important not only to know what is important to you and what your priorities are as a candidate, but what's important to the people. And so what are you hearing from the people at the door as far as what they're most concerned about in District 101?
I will be honest. The number one question that I get at the door is my thoughts on Ryan Walters and education, and what my solution would be to education. That is by far the number one question and concern that I hear at the door. And I'll tell you, so I think that Ryan Walters is doing a good job. I think that he has the best intentions of the students in mind. I do think that sometimes his messaging may be a bit skewed, and it may come off a little rough around the edges. That's hard for some people to deal with. But I do think that he has the best intentions, and he is doing the best that he can for the students of Oklahoma. For when it comes to education, I have a really hard time with it, and here's why: is that last year we appropriated $3 billion or so to education, so about a quarter of the budget, and that has been trending upwards over the last 5 to 7 years in the amount of money that we've given to education. But what we've seen is no tangible change or progress to remove us from 49th in education to somewhere higher up in the nation. And so it begs my question of, if is money the problem that we're seeing in education? We always hear from teachers unions, schools, and the vast majority of the public is that we'll just give them more money. Well, clearly giving them more money is not the answer, right? Because we've given them more money and we're not seeing any increase or progress to make us better. What I think a big problem is the efficiency in the way that school districts and the state Department of Education spends that money. And so Missouri has a similar student population in the mid, like 700,000 enrolled students. And they have about 520 school districts. I think it's 521 if I'm not mistaken. Or 526, one of those two, I can't remember. But Oklahoma, we have 590 school districts, right? Which each one of those superintendents making six figures, and administrators who are making six figures, and right. Well, if we reduce that to, let's even say 540, right? That's almost $5 million in just salaries that the state Department of Education could save, right? That's $5 million that could go to teacher pay raises, that could go back into the schools, so teachers aren't having to self-pay or pay for like items for their classroom, with this, which the school should be providing. I I just don't like the idea that the solution is always just more money, because that's clearly not a solution that's been working.
Right. And you talk about what you brought up earlier about, with your daughter in mind, the things that you could do in the state that would set things up for her future. I think that this would be one of the most pertinent issues is with regard to education.
Yeah.
And so it's been central to the discussion for many years here in Oklahoma. It was when I was in the Senate, and part of that big discussion is parent choice and the ability to choose where your children go to school. We had the recent tax credit that was passed, and there's debate about whether that was effective or not. And so where do you stand on this issue of tax credits, vouchers, on student choice, parent choice, these issues that are being discussed with regard to education today in Oklahoma?
I will say the voucher system, I'm not well educated on, and so I won't take a stance on the voucher system because I just don't know a lot about it, and I don't want to make an uneducated statement that I don't know about.
Yeah.
What I will say though is that if it comes to the parents having the choice on where their student goes to school and how their student is educated versus them not, I will 100% stand behind the parent. The parent should have sole discretionary power on what is taught to their students. That's why we have school board meetings. That's why school board are elected officials, and to provide parents with a actual accountable person to have an influence in how their students are educated. And I think that when we take away parents out of schools, thinking that the government has the best solutions for educating their children, that is not okay. The parents, I would be appalled if a teacher told me that I could not know what my what my daughter was being taught. And so if I'll say it this way, I think that the parents should have 100% autonomy on where they want to send their kid to school. If I want to drive my students 40 miles north of where I live and put her in school there, I should be able to do so. If I think
Right.
that school district is teaching better than my current school district.
What do you think about moving the school board elections from the spring to November? Obviously, that's been talked about for years. We thought that this might be the year it would get passed, and it got close, but no cigar this year either. Is that something that you would want to get behind as well, or do you like the school board elections being in the spring?
No, I like it being in November, and I think we have to. And here's a really good example. There was a school board in Tulsa, right? Tulsa's a pretty large school district. Its school board election was won or was decided by 144 votes. Not that like one candidate won by 144 votes. No, approximately only 144 people voted in the
Yeah.
election. And that is absurd. I
Yeah.
think you're talking about arguably one of the most important elected officials in the state, right? Like the people who have this authority over how your child is educated. And unfortunately, those spring elections are low turnout elections, even in election years, like presidential election years, right? If we want an accurate representation and to allow our students to have the best chance at having adequate representation at the school board, then we have to. It is imperative that it's moved to either a primary in July, right? Like in a state primary, or even better, in a November general election, right? Like
Yeah.
one of those two dates, I'm okay with either of them, right? Both of those are a better option than where it's currently at now.
Yeah, I would agree, and I think that the majority of people in Oklahoma would like to see that happen. What else are you hearing at the doorstep? What are the concerns of people out in House District 101?
Yeah, another big one is just illegal immigration is obviously a big concern and how Oklahoma will protect itself. And then obviously, two was the economic impacts that are happening across the nation, but specifically in Oklahoma. And so I think a lot of people got really excited about the idea of cutting a state income tax because the governor said it was his point and like that he would do it and that he'd work on it. We heard a little bit of scuffling inside the House and the Senate, and ultimately it wasn't passed and it wasn't heard. And so I think that here's what I'll say too is to this, and I'm not sure how many of the general public know this. I'm sure you remember when you were in office, there was an attempt at that point to cut the grocery sales tax 2 years ago.
Yep.
However, the House leadership would not allow that vote to come to the floor. What I find very odd, and what I want a lot of people to understand, is that far too often our legislators are playing politics with our lives. And what I'll say by that is, what changed in 2 years that allowed us to cut the grocery sales tax this year, but we couldn't do it 2 years ago? Well, the only thing that I can think of, the economy was terrible 2 years ago. We were still reeling from COVID. The government was still trying to open up, right, and like across the country. So we can't say that, oh, well, the economy's in a much worse place than it is, right? Tax revenue is still around the same that it's always been, even though we levied the second largest last year at 14.1 billion. But what it is that this is a presidential election year. The legislators and the House leadership know that this will be a high turnout election, and the chance to overturn seats in both chambers is exorbitantly higher this year than in any other year until the next presidential election, right?
Yep.
And you'll see it. It'll be on every single Republican mailer who voted yes for the grocery sales tax that they cut their sales tax.
Oh yeah.
However,
Oh
they
yeah.
couldn't do it 2 years ago. They couldn't cut a sales or a state income tax that would actually help people because the grocery sales tax only saves a household on average $400 a year. Which brings me to a really good point: is that only cost, I think I saw the state $360 million in revenue from state sales tax, but yet we had a $1.1 billion surplus in taxes levied last year to the budget that we spent.
Right.
So you're telling me that we can't find another way to either redo the tax structure to reduce the tax burden on Oklahomans or completely do it away with it, I think that's a load of malarkey, and that the
Yeah.
legislators are playing politics in an election year with people's lives in a time when inflation is soaring, the economy is in the dumpster, and they have the audacity to mail that they did something great for the state of Oklahoma
Yeah.
when they were just trying to do something great for their campaign.
Exactly. It's a load of something, that's for sure. And I agree. We see so many political games played at the expense of the actual people, and it's very discouraging and frustrating. And I think that's where people are. They're frustrated with it. You know, you brought up the other issue of immigration, and again, that's an issue that I would like to ask pertaining to your perspective as a law enforcement agent. You know, this new law that's been signed by the governor going into effect July 1st would essentially empower law enforcement agents to actually do something if they were to come across an illegal immigrant. You know, what is your perspective on that? Have y'all had discussions in the department about this and how you would engage with the illegals in light of this new law?
It has not come across us yet, at least at my department, on a policy on how we would handle any illegal immigrants. I think that the legislature did a good job. I think that I do appreciate their attempt to try to shield Oklahoma from the disastrous border policies that we see at the southern border. I'm just not sure if it's enough.
Yeah.
And here's why. I'm pretty sure I said it on your first show, there is a vast majority of nonprofits that ardently work in opposition of both state and federal law to house, fund illegal immigrants in the state of Oklahoma. And if we are going to take a proactive approach to protecting Oklahomans from the impacts of illegal immigration in our state, then we have to do more than just empowering a retroactive way, right? So we're empowering law enforcement that once they've already broken the law, to send them somewhere else, right? To take enforcement action against them. What we need to do, or something that we should think about doing, I should say, is finding market incentives to incentivize these nonprofits not to conduct that type of business in our state. Make it clear to them that if you violate the law, there will be consequences for you and your nonprofit, right? Because yes, we are punishing the illegal immigrant who came here illegally, but we are not punishing those who aided and abetted as an active actor, like, right? Like, it's not like they didn't know that they were doing that. Who took an active role in both bringing them to our state and housing them in our state. And I think that is crucial to protecting our state, is ensuring that we find a way to prohibit that from occurring.
Right. Lots of questions around the teeth that are actually in that bill and the actual impact it could have on the state. And I feel like that may be the intent, as another political move to look like we're doing something without it really having a direct impact on the people. And so, again, I appreciate the move, and we needed to do something. But again, it's election year. I think it could be something that could be handy on a mailer to say that you voted for this and you work to protect our Oklahoma borders. Again, not despising it. I think it is a good move, but I do question the motivation and the weakness behind the piece of legislation. Jonathan, I don't want to make it too long for the listeners. Of course, I could sit here and talk with you all day because I think we're on the same page on most things. Yeah. I do want to ask you about the party platform. You're running as a Republican. I have two more questions just about that, about the party platform, what that means to you to be a Republican.
Yeah, so I think that I'll split that in two parts, right? For me, what it means to be a Republican is that I believe in the family unit, the conservative point of view, and the rights and responsibilities of people, right? And the form and role of government. I think that, and being restrictive of itself, right? And that it's government's sole job there as a necessary evil to restrict itself. I believe, and to the party platform, is that those are a set of values and beliefs that we as Republicans say that we agree on, and that we want our laws and the structure of our government to reflect. As you know, that the party platform can be amended at state conventions to change things, right? If we as Republicans deem that there's something in it that needs to be changed. And so I think to be a Republican, you have to do two things. One, you have to have a belief that you are free of your own person and that you have freedom to make whatever decisions it is that you want to make, right? And then two, Republicans, we believe that the government's sole job is to represent us and to protect the rights of people. And I think far too often in the Republican Party, we lose ourselves a little bit in that we chase down rabbit holes of problems and kind of forget that chasing down that problem, we're actually going against a vast majority of what we say that we believe in trying to solve a certain issue. And I think my message to Republicans and to the voters of my district is that I will ardently try not to be that, right? I will vote in a manner that is conservative, that will protect the rights of people, will uphold the values that we all say that we agree on, and address the issues of our state and the issues of our district with both an open mind and with a way that represents and reflects our values without losing those.
Very good. Final question, Jonathan, and it's what you alluded to in the very beginning of this interview, your position on not taking lobbyist or PAC money. And I recently had a conversation, an interview with Jason Murphy, former House rep, and he's very clear on this issue. I think he's right on of that. There's a trend right now with new candidates coming into running for office that are more and more refusing to take lobbyist and PAC money, and that this could be, and I believe probably is, the single most significant driver of corruption that leads to compromise when someone is officially elected and in office. And so you personally have decided not to take lobbyist and PAC money. What's behind that reasoning?
I think that power should be with people. I think that we've waited far too long as both a state and a nation to return power back to people. We hear it on every single campaign slogan, every single Republican who runs for office, that they want to return power to the people. But yet, a lot like the legislation they run, it's teethless and it's meaningless because they take no stance to actively do that. I think there is no better way to empower the people to sway their legislators than to have a legislator who is only accountable to and only beholden to the voter. And that's what I want to be. I don't want to owe anybody any money. I don't want to own a political action committee, corporation, lobbyist, or special interest group any favors, because the only people that I am answerable to are those who elect me. And that's the only people that I want to represent.
Jonathan, I do these interviews for two main reasons. I want the people to hear from the candidates and to give the candidates an opportunity to speak to the people and to reveal and lay out exactly who you are, what you believe, what you're running for. I do it for that reason. And I also do it for a selfish reason so that I can learn more about the candidates. And so that, because I know you're not in my district, but you ultimately will make votes and make decisions that will impact me in the state of Oklahoma. And so It's important to me what's happening in eastern Oklahoma and far western Oklahoma, in areas outside of my own district. So your position is important to me. And I can wholeheartedly say, Jonathan, after interviewing you twice, having a few private conversations with you, that it's obvious that what you're saying doesn't come from a script. It comes from an understanding of principle, understanding of values, an understanding of government, the roles of government, and what freedom truly is. And so for all those reasons, Jonathan, this is going to be a first time on this podcast, but I want to offer my wholehearted endorsement to you as candidate for House District 101. I believe that what you are bringing, what you offer is exactly what we need here in Oklahoma. So thank you for entering. Thank you for sacrificing so much, both on the job as a police officer, at home as a dad, giving to you, your family, your daughter. And then on top of that, sacrificing so much to run for this position for the right reasons. So for all of those reasons, I just want to say publicly, I endorse Jonathan Hewitt for House District 101.
Thank you so much, Jake. I am humbled. I think that there are endorsements that come from all across the states, and you know that. And to receive an endorsement, one from a legislator of your caliber, means a lot. But more so, to receive one from a humbled man of your stature is just incredible to me. I hold you in very high regard. I have ever since I first met you when you were in the Senate. And so to have somebody that I both look up to politically and then socially, it means a lot to me.
Well, that's humbling. I thank you for that, but I really appreciate you, and like I feel the same way. It's been a pleasure knowing you since the first day I met you, and I'm excited to see what this leads to. I think it's great things. Jonathan, I really appreciate your time here today, and we'll continue praying for you and your family as you finish this campaign strong, and I expect to see you in the House.
Thanks, Jake. And if you ever need anything, and please give me a call. It was a pleasure to be on your show as always.
Absolutely. Well, guys, you've heard it. Jonathan Hewitt running for House District 101. If you're in 101, man, you need to listen closely and share widely. But even if you're not, I think it definitely impacts you. The decisions made by every legislature across the state will impact you in some way, shape, or form. So be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and let people know about this podcast and this interview in particular. But I appreciate you guys tuning in, and I'll see you next time on the Jake for the State podcast.